Arden Labs, specializing in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, and development. Module 12 Testing. You are now watching Lesson 12.5, Subtests.
A new feature, I think it was around 1.8 that came out with Go, were subtests. And subtests are really brilliant. It's a really brilliant mechanism, especially when you're dealing with those data tests. So if you go back and remember, we had those data tests where we had a different piece of data in the collection. I mean, one of the problems with data tests is that if you want to just isolate one piece of data on a given test run, you have to comment out all that data. It's really frustrating. So what subtests are going to do, especially as it relates to the data, is let us treat each piece of data kind of as its own test without having to write extra test functions. So let me show you how to do that. So we go back to our test download function here, and you see the table that we had seen before, except I've added another field to the table on line 24, which is called name. So now what we're going to do is we're going to give a unique name to each of these, this data, the input and the expected output. So before we had just had the URL and the status code. We now have a name URL and status code. So we go back into our given, and from given we range over our table. But now look at what we do. For every data that we have, for every piece of data, what we do is define a literal function. So we're going to define a literal test function for every piece of data. And what we're going to do is the regular testing that you saw there. So our when and should is inside each individual test function now. We've separated out each piece of data in its own function, TF. And then on line 54, we go ahead and we bind this literal test function to that name that was in the table test, and we set it up as a subtest. So there it is, t.run. And these tests will now run in series. And what's nice is we can run all of these tests, or we can even filter by name. So let's test some of that out here. Let's go in here. So let's go in and we're going to say, okay, go test, right? Run all of those test downloads and -v. And now what you're going to see here is that it ran the test download. We also know that it ran status OK, and it also ran status not found. So now we have this extra name that's associated with each of these data tests that we did before. We also know how long those tests took individually. But I think the real power of the subtest is this, because I can now say, you know what, just run status OK for me, please. And boom, that's all it did. Really, really cool stuff, right? I don't have to go and start commenting out the status not found data to run this test. I can run them all, and then I can just filter on the command line which data record I want to run. But I also think what's cool is, because we've got separate test functions here, what they added also was the idea of running tests in parallel now. So normally when you run a test inside of a set of unit tests inside one package, they run in series. Right? They run in series. You can run tests in parallel across packages, but here they're going to run in series. But when we use these subtests, we can literally run these tests in parallel as well. So there we are again with our table on line 62. It has those names. And the same thing, we've got the given, we're ranging over the tests, and we're creating those separate test functions. Except now on line 75, I added the parallel call. What this is going to tell the testing tool is, don't wait to run the next test until this one finishes. Run all of these subtests in parallel. So watch what's going to happen again. If I run all these tests in series, right, you can see that the first one took 47 milliseconds. This one took 16 for a total of almost 640 milliseconds, right? Well, if we run the test parallelize function instead, here we go. I'm going to say run test parallelize -v. You'll see how much faster this all ran. We went from 640 to 238 because these tests were now running in parallel. So the slowest test is really a reflection of how long the test took, not the summation of all tests like you see there. So the idea of being able to run those tests in parallel can also speed up your unit testing, especially if you have a large core set of unit testing around this data. Just got to make sure that these tests can run in parallel. They're not going to be kind of trashing each other. But it's a really nice way of organizing your unit tests by data, being able to filter that on the command line, and then also be able to run those tests in parallel.